how does inflation come down if the government unions and Fair Work Commission award above inflation pay rises? Something has to give, you see. If productivity is as low as it is and companies are making less, do remember that a record number of businesses went broke in Australia last year. So here's the Prime Minister talking about that today.
We have never put figures on our submissions. Obviously, they will take into account what the economic circumstances are in this, but it's very clear we want a real wage increase.
Real wage increase means above inflation. Peter Dutton chimed in wanting higher wages, but gave no real strategy about how they were going to be achieved.
We're without economic advice from Treasury and from Finance, but our position is that we want higher wages and we want to make sure that we've got downward pressure on costs, because under this government, real wages have gone backwards. And that's just the reality of people's lives.
Well, today we heard from the employers also. The Australian Chamber for Commerce and Industry called for a minimum wage increase of 2.5%, which is smack bang in the middle of the Reserve Bank's preferred inflation band. And the Australian Industry Group, which represents many of the businesses that will need to pass on the Fair Work Commission's wage determination, said it will urge for a 2.6% wage increase. Its Chief Executive, Innes Willox, joins me now. Innes, thanks for your time. I mean, here you go. The government basically says above inflation wage rises. The question is they have to be paid for at a time when really business is struggling because there's no economic growth.
Afternoon, Ross. The question is who's going to pay it? And of course, the answer is employers will be expected to pay it at a time of massive economic stress for a lot of the private sector across the Australian economy at the moment. We're seeing the private sector shrink relative to the growth of the public sector. We're seeing, as you said, significant number of business closures, and the sort of businesses who would be in the front line of paying this, retail, hospitality, parts of construction and the like, are those sectors which are most under stress at the moment. What has really surprised us is the government, or the Labor Party as it is now in the caretaker mode, walking away from any link whatsoever between wage rises and productivity growth. The fact is we've got productivity at levels that it was in 2019, been no growth, and since then we've seen quite substantial wage increases well above inflation year after year now for the past few years without anything back for employers. So the question we have here for that submission that's been put forward is, something has to give in the end for business. They just can't continue to pay substantial wage increases without something back when it comes to productivity improvement. And it's deeply disappointing that, one of the major participants in this process has walked away from a productivity link, and that disturbs us.
OK, so one of the things it could give in us, and it hasn't given so far, it's been robust, is the unemployment rate, because the government has forecast 4.25% unemployment rates all the way out for the next 4 years. If all of a sudden unemployment were to jump above that rate, that starts to cost the government. That also starts to cost the budget, and that would be more alarming to the community and more alarming certainly to the Labor Party.
Well, we have to ask ourselves, Ross, why the private sector is shedding so many jobs at the moment that it is. If it was not for the public spend of governments, federal and state, if you just left things as they were pre the spending spree that began about 18 months ago, unemployment across the country now would be 5.5%. That tells you the pressure and the stress that the private sector is under. Second point is, as far as we can see, the government in the budget didn't make any provision for wage increases itself, and it is responsible for within the public sector. So a lot of jobs that are covered by the minimum wage increase occur within the public sector. So that's another issue that has to be addressed. The reality is, Ross, that this sets the floor for wage discussions going forward, and we're seeing enormous pressure on business. So we're not saying no wage increase. What we're arguing for a wage increase which is right around where inflation is at the moment, plus the 0.5% superannuation increase that will come into effect from the 1st of July, which is paid for by employers. That doesn't grow on trees. So that would take you up to 3.1%. And we think that is a pretty fair deal given the current circumstances that business is under and where the economy is at.
Because something's stuck at the moment, and it seems as though people don't want to build homes because there's no money in building homes. People don't want to go out and expand their businesses in Australia because there's no profit motive to do so. Something's kind of stuck in this country, and it seems as though government, in many ways, by employing so many public servants, state and federal, really have almost got in the way of business itself being able to employ people at affordable levels.
Well, what that spend has done, Ross, is mask what's really going on in the economy, where 80% of Australians work and derive their income and their prosperity. And that is telling us there is real stress there. Business closures on the one hand, businesses not investing on the other. When businesses aren't investing, we've got a problem, and they're not investing because economic circumstances are not great. And we're about to go through another period of massive volatility starting tomorrow with the Trump tariffs and how that washes through the economy. Indeed. So this is a difficult time for business, and anything above around what we have proposed is completely unjustified in the current economic circumstances. Indeed. We will be arguing very hard for no more than 2.6.
Willox, always good to chat to you, and many thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ross. Take care.